as a career reconnaissance officer, we're paid to see the unseen, to go
Yes.
300 kilometers behind enemy lines and see what's there, report it back accurately. Well, and that's what I do. And I don't have like this vindictive thing. Although Mattis was the convening authority, he sent an unprecedented, he dogpiled on us. He was, I don't like to call him Mad Dog, but he's a lapdog, but he sent 45 criminal investigators, 4 prosecuting attorneys, and they interrogated our Marines so viciously, so unethically and illegally, threatened to deport one Marine who legally immigrated, but they knew that like this is a point of vulnerability. I mentioned it in the book. Many immigrants think that they're never actually truly, like their citizenship, which the 14th Amendment protects, whether you're native born or naturalized, they think maybe I have it revoked. Well, he said on the witness stand that, the statement that he wrote in Afghanistan was correct, but then he was interrogated by prosecuting attorneys. So NCIS can use deception. Marine staff judge advocates, officers cannot. And he said these 2 officers, conducted this interrogation and coerced me into signing this. So he had to make a decision between his blood brothers, his family, and his brothers in arms, something no American soldier. I mean, this is something that we learn in survival, evasion, and resistance, like our POW training. But we're not supposed to do it. It's illegal to do on our own. But those lawyers, what happened to them, the prosecutors, they were actually promoted. This is the government that we are left.
Welcome back to the program. My guest today is a highly decorated, retired Marine Major veteran. He served his country for 26 years and has led hundreds of combat missions, including raids, deep reconnaissance, ship seizures, ambush operations, you name it, in Iraq, Afghanistan, and the Arabian Gulf. While conducting a combat mission in Afghanistan, he and 6 other Marines were falsely accused of war crimes, which led to the longest trial in Marine Corps history that thankfully eventually led to their acquittal and exoneration. He is here today to tell his side of that story in his brand new book, A Few Bad Men, the true story of U.S. Marines ambushed in Afghanistan and betrayed in America. Please welcome retired Marine Corps Major Fred Galvin to the program. Fred, it is an absolute pleasure to have you on the show today.
Likewise, Josh. Thank you for having me.
Good, good. Well, first and foremost, thank you very much for your service, your commitment to America and keeping us safe. God bless you for that. Unfortunately, veterans don't get the respect as much as they deserve it. And it seems like the left in particular really doesn't like the military, but we'll go into that here in a little bit. So before we get into your book, of course, and what happened to you, I want to kind of point out a couple of things that you may agree with, you may disagree with, but I believe them to be as fact. Number one, and I don't call him Mark Milley, I call him Maoist Milley. Maoist Milley is a traitor to our nation. I believe he should be stripped of his pension, his rank, his retirement, court-martialed and sent to prison or even worse. Number two, Milley, Austin, and the entire Biden regime knew about the attack that was coming in Afghanistan, but refused to stop it. Number three, the regime told Karzai to lie and say that the security situation on the ground at the airport was not as dire as it actually was. Number four, Milley committed even more treason when he told his CCP counterpart that if there was an attack against China, that he would let them know beforehand. And the fifth one, the military equipment that was left in Afghanistan is being used by Hamas against Israel and was used in the October 7th attack. Now, that is a lot to digest, clearly, but is any of that, in your opinion, off balance or wrong, or am I on target?
Josh, you're on target, and I'll reinforce it with some additional facts that if you look at the Pentagon, the revolving door they have with the military industrial complex, I call it the No General Left Behind program. So, when Four-Star General Lloyd Austin retired out of CENTCOM down in Tampa, he went straight to Raytheon. Same thing with his predecessor, who was down there uh, in charge of CENTCOM. That's all the Middle East operations. General Mattis, his predecessor, where did he go when he retired? Well, he went to four boards, one of them being Theranos, which you realize they frauded millions and billions, literally. This is Elizabeth Holmes, dropped out from Stanford, dressed up like Steve Jobs. Well, they had this blood testing device they wanted to try on servicemen in Afghanistan. So while James Mattis was the four-star general in CENTCOM, he was pushing the Pentagon, writing emails. This is all documented. I ask your listeners to find it out for themselves, saying, we've been at this for a year. Tell me what obstacles need to be removed. So he's trying to coerce the Pentagon to test this on our lads in Afghanistan. And what does this make a difference? He doesn't have a PhD in epidemiology or biology. He is paid for access to the Pentagon. That's the largest employer. If you take the next two largest employers, Amazon and Walmart, largest employers by headcount, stack them on top of each other, it doesn't add up to the total of active reserves, contractors, civilians. So this is big money. If you take out non-discretionary spendings like the entitlements, this is the largest spending on Department of Defense. So where does Mattis go besides Theranos, which was proven to be a fraud? And he stepped out in front of Congress 2 years ago saying, I didn't know. Well, you're on the board of directors, Jim. You better know. You're obligated to know because you're pushing to jab this into the bodies of our service members. But he goes to General Dynamics. Before General Miley, that chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff was Marine General John Dunford. In the book that I was in, he lied to the four Kansas and Missouri senators where I lived and worked and had my business, as well as Congressman Walter Jones, saying none of the Marines in this case that I was involved in, none of the seven had anything adverse in their administratively done to them, or none of them were punished. Well, I had adverse information, which led to me not being promoted. So when you lie to Congress, Josh, it's a felony. That is a felony. When you're the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, which he got promoted to, he was, at that time when he lied, he was the commandant of the Marine Corps. And having worked for generals, nothing goes to members of the Senate or House Armed Services Committees unless it's thoroughly checked. They knew that I had adverse information. But the point is, General Dunford lied. And where is he? He's on the board of directors at Lockheed Martin. As a senior board of director member, again, the largest
Military industrial complex, garbage in,
so
garbage
all
out.
this money, and it goes right on along with what you're saying, Josh, is worth sitting here thinking like, why would we leave billions of dollars worth of military equipment? I mean, it's still functional. That's okay, because if you're Lloyd Austin and you just came from Raytheon and you're in charge of the Pentagon, you know better when you're Josh, when you're saying whether it's Lloyd Austin or whether it's President Joe Biden is commander in chief, and Lloyd Austin here over New Year's, he was out for some surgical procedure which nobody seemed to know about. And you're like, that leads to the question with the president and Secretary of Defense, who is running the country? Literally, who's running the Pentagon? Who's running the country? We have the strongest, largest military, but who's running it? So we have a shadow government that's doing this, and they literally do not mind if we lose or leave all this equipment there because we're going to be able to replenish it. And when when the president says for political purposes, hey, I'm going to pull out of Afghanistan because it's going to get me points in the polls, the military is going to, just like a bad move in the stock market, if you're Goldman Sachs, you're going to figure out how to quickly and agilely pivot and succeed in another direction. And that's exactly what they did with this war. As soon as they saw that weakness with how we failed, and I can get into a whole nother story about how a friend of mine who was the Marine commander on the ground, who had those 13 Marines and a soldier killed, they pulled the Marines out and they put them back in. It was a total goat rodeo, completely against what we do in the military and the Department of State as far as how to conduct non-combatant evacuation operations. That is not how we do business, but they did it. Military personnel died. American civilians died and were left behind. The first plane out with over 600, they loaded up more Afghans. Who were they vetted? Please. But we do non-combatant evacuations. Priority one, literally in the Department of State manual, is American citizens. We have to triage people. The Marines go in there, we triage them. The Afghans flew out on the C-17, running down there. It's proof.
It was the worst disaster
Yes.
of political foreign policy
Yes.
from America since the 1970s in the Vietnam pullout. Of course, I mean they're almost
Yes.
reminiscent. The helicopters leaving, you know, all that good stuff. But I mean, as many as possibly 14,000 Americans, contractors, and affiliates of the Afghan military that were working in concert with some of the American military personnel. You know, the billions of dollars we know about. Some reports have shown that the Taliban went from literally having nothing and no military to being, the 14th largest military overnight. I mean, it's sickening that no one was fired for it. No one was court-martialed for it. No one resigned for it. I mean, there was calls for the puppet to resign, and of course he didn't. Then you have the affirmative action candidate, Austin, I'll say it, you don't have to, who was unqualified to be in that position. You've got Maoist Milley. I mean, it's an absolute disaster. And that certainly doesn't bode well when you're looking at China, when you're looking at Russia, when you're looking at North Korea, when you're looking at Iran and all the rest of them that are seeing the paper tiger. And that's the problem. And we just saw him just call President Trump. He called him his vice president Trump.
Yes.
I mean, it's not just the whatchamacallit, the sound bites that are devastating, but let's not forget that all of our adversaries are seeing this as well.
Oh, yeah.
They have the internet, right?
Yeah.
So they go out there and they can say, wow, America is this weak. Who's running that country? Just as you alluded to, I mean, it's unbelievable what has been able to transpire in the last
year. Josh, if I could comment on that, when President Trump was a commander in chief, he was negotiating with the Taliban and he wanted a planned withdrawal that was condition based. And you may have heard Congressman Wesley Hunt from Houston, Texas, describe this conversation because he was in the room. He said President Trump was negotiating with the Taliban with an interpreter, and he said, I want a conditions-based withdrawal, and if an American has a hair on their head harmed in our withdrawal, I will kill you. Pulls out of his pocket and hands him a satellite image of the Taliban member's house, the senior Taliban member's house. And guess what happened then? Trump got up and left the room. That's the Reagan strength through power doctrine, exercised by a commander in chief who's sovereign, who's feared. And guess what? For the last 18 months while he was president, then no American, and these are people that I'm friends with that were serving over there, not a single American was harmed. Now we have let me go with the tail of the tape, what's been going on in the last 3 years, especially after that. Let's call it what it is. It's not a Camp David retreat, but it was a retreat, as in a failed withdrawal from Afghanistan. That emboldened,
I call it Talibanistan now, to be honest.
Yes, and that's what it was. Gave them the weapons, which is fine because all these military-industrial complex, they have their generals who retired out of the Pentagon. They have access and placement. They know, and because they've been lying and doing the Potomac 2 steps, they know all the members of the House and Senate Armed Services Committees. And that's fine because, like I said, number one, non-discretionary spending. This is big jobs for every state that these people are represented in. So what happens? We have this proxy war. We decide, okay, you have Hunter Biden over there, why he's getting paid $83,000 on the board of Burisma for something he's unqualified for. What's pay to play? Russia invades Ukraine. Joe shuts up about it. All the military industrial companies, they are making money hands over fists to the point where, and I've been on other shows and I've gone the tail of the tape, the Pentagon has lost accounting of how many billions of dollars we've spent. It's literally out of control. And President Zelensky, who President Biden yesterday called President Putin, I mean, that guy is, if he ever went to Vegas or Macau, I want to be with him because he knows how to make more money than anybody on this planet, and it's all corrupt and crooked.
Yeah.
Why is, if Josh, and I've mentioned on other shows, if this is such a big threat, and they talk about, oh, this is the domino theory. If Ukraine falls, all next will be Poland. Okay, why did Trump want everybody in NATO, pay to play? Hey, you got to pay your share. Well, the money that's given by Italy is like less than a billion. Germany, like a billion. Poland, it's less than a billion. Why are these countries not putting in any money? If they're the ones right on the border, why don't they sense any kind of threat from this and be like, hey, we'd rather do it by proxy too? But they're not.
Right.
This
That's a
is
great point. I've said this before, and I'll say it again right now. We are compromised. The Ukraine government, the most corrupt government in all of Western Europe, let's face it, they know where all the bodies are buried. They know where all the secrets lie of the Biden crime family. And so they're extorting, for all intents and purposes, this fake regime in Washington, saying if you don't keep the money train coming, we're going to release all of this information. And so we have a compromised fake regime in Washington that is being run by China, Ukraine, and the oligarchs and the globalists. And we don't have anyone in control right now. So what did Barack Obama say? If I could sit back in my bunker and have a little earpiece in and say, and move someone else's mouth and put my hand up there, I mean, it's ridiculous. But you know what? The American people now know it too. And
yes.
they can see it now for themselves. And that's where things are dangerous, because I don't want complacency to sit in. I don't want Republicans to think like they did in 2020, where everything is, working in our favor. We can just sit back. These people are stone cold demonic criminals, and they will
Yes.
do anything, cut anyone's throat to stay in power. And we have to understand that, and we have to act and be proactive, including President Trump, rather than being reactive.
Two things that go right along that. When you mentioned Obama, when he was the 44th president, his Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, she would go to these countries, and then the next plane that would land would be her husband, Bill Clinton, who'd come in and give a speech for a couple $1 million. And then it became so brazen that they would fly in together on the same plane. And he was making on some of these speeches up to $500 million. Now, you don't give somebody $500 million unless there's something in return. Let's get things straight here. But that stopped when Hillary lost the election. They knew what was coming and what that money was for. And we see the same thing. And mark my words, Josh, I'll bet you, let's come up with a deal here that on November 11th, all these board deals with Hunter, not just because he's, charged in California with gun violations and he's been in contempt of Congress, but they're going to all dry up as well. And that shows you that Donald Trump is right when he's talking about how low the deep state is and how entrenched it is. And the lowest part there in Washington, D.C., we all understand that was built on swampland, but the lowest part of Arlington in the district is actually Arlington's in Virginia, but the lowest part is the Pentagon. And there's just so much money that gets siphoned, and that's American taxpayers' dollars. And I want to talk about two things on this subject, Josh, because when the American taxpayers, we're not getting a discount. It's not like, ooh, well, we're getting this money and we're fighting this war over in Ukraine and somebody else is doing it. We're paying money for all these weapon systems, whether we use them or somebody else. That's coming out of American taxpayers' dollars. And when we are trusting people in the Pentagon, and I'll tell you, Josh, if you're wearing stars, especially 4 stars on your collar, and you're working in the Pentagon, you are not stupid. I will testify. These people are smart. They know what they're doing, and they're doing it knowing that this is not in the best interest of America or American taxpayers, but they're doing it anyway because they have families and it's, cooperate and graduate. They're dangling the carrot. This is what all these generals who, they retire, they get access to the Pentagon. Hey, Josh, let's go out and play some golf. And how the kids doing? And you're about ready to retire, and we can use a leader over, our company, Oshkosh. They have these big mine resistant vehicles that we're going to sell. We need somebody like you. So they dangle the carrot, and these guys go along. They acquiesce. They compromise their morals, and you see this time and time again. I was working for the Department of Defense as a civilian up until about 2 years ago, and it is so compromised. And then I return, I see some friends that are still in, and I see how obese our military has gotten. So again, we're not getting a discount. We should, if we're paying the most, we should be getting the best, the very best. Just like Donald Trump, he's negotiating deals. But in the last few years, and I was doing influence operations, and I know very well what China and Russia are doing as far as sowing seeds, doing psychological operations. That's why that consulate down in Houston was closed. Is they are participating in all these Black Lives Matters, all this divisiveness, all this LGBTQ to try to divide America. That's our strength. They did their mission analysis on America. They realized this is what makes them strong is when they're united, just like on 9/11 or on December 7th, 1941. We have to have the opposite of that. We have to tear it apart. And this is what's been going on, not just across America, but now in the last 3 years with this administration, and Lloyd Austin testifying to Congress about critical race theory, Miley testifying to Congress about the reason that he believes in critical race theory. This is dividing our military. I will tell you, all across our military, all the friends I have, they are at each other's throats. They believe in this total divisiveness. We can't, a hockey team, you name the team, it's not best when it's totally divided and people can't work in harmony and unity together. But that's what's going on in our military. And our enemies know that their psychological operations are effective. No longer are we this deterrent like Trump number 45, when he said, hey, I'm going to kill you. Well, let's look at what happened with that failed withdrawal from Afghanistan. Since then,
Exactly.
we did a stupid where we gave $6 billion back to Iran this past October.
Yeah,
And then
which
we've
was
had
used
over,
to fund the entire operation to kill 1,400 Jews.
yeah. And
It's
also
unbelievable.
Americans, we've had Americans killed and wounded. There's over 200 attacks in the Middle East since October. And these are facts. I've got friends over there. One was on our patrol on 4 March in the book A Few Bad Men. He got blown up again. But this is happening again and again, 200 times in Iraq, Syria. It's funding the Houthi rebels, these militias all over Iraq and Syria. With these MSC, American flagged container ships, 2 of them have been hit since April, in the Middle East. That was not going on when Trump was in office. And he's right.
Nor do you hear about it either because of the
The
media,
media's
or as I like
complicit.
to call them, prostitutes. They don't report on those things because it's not favorable to the illegitimate regime in Washington. But I want to take a step now back down memory lane here. You've obviously written this incredible book, A Few Bad Men. So tell us a little bit about this story, if you can, exactly kind of what happened about the trial, and of course, thankfully, the exoneration.
Yes, Josh. And I'll start off for your listeners and viewers of the so what. People think like, well, he's exonerated, and we're going to get to that in a second and how that whole thing went down. But this is lawfare. This is what Stalinistic type of tactics in communist and Soviet countries use. This is not supposed to be how we do business in America. This is something you'd see in Tehran or Pyongyang, not in America. And if it can be used against myself, which it was multiple times, and I'll get into this, if it can be used against allies of President Trump and a political opponent. So he has 2 of his close friends, Steve Bannon, Peter Navarro, incarcerated right now. Peter Navarro is about ready to get out. And whether it's Georgia, Florida, New York, I mean, they are using lawfare against President Trump in an all-out effort to keep somebody who cannot be paid out of the White House. And they're doing every single thing they can. In America, this can happen to you, just like President Trump says, if they're just coming to get him and he's in the way trying to defend so that this doesn't happen to you. And let me tell you how this happened. We got ambushed. I'll give you the 30,000 foot overview. We were on a patrol in Eastern Afghanistan. We were the very first Marine Special Operations Task Force that was organized, trained, and deployed. The last place Osama bin Laden was seen was in the Tor Bora Mountains of Afghanistan. We knew he pushed him into Pakistan, but we were sent into those Tor Bora Mountains in an effort to try to locate, close with, and destroy Osama bin Laden and his network. And that's what we were tasked to do. And that's what we did. We entered this village right on the Afghan-Pakistan border. And let me tell you, in 2007, Pakistan was a sanctuary. We couldn't go in there. So that was radicalizing terrorists. And then they would come across this border checkpoint because the United States had paid for the first highway, the first paved road. And you know what that did, Josh? That just expedited all the exportation of poppy and opium that was
Exactly.
fueling terrorism. So all these jihadists that once they got fully radicalized and trained in Western Pakistan, they'd come across this town, and we had incontrovertible intelligence of 4 suicide bombers that were in this very first little village. And let me explain a village right on the border of a town like Afghanistan, Pakistan. That's basically like your Amazon fulfillment center. That's everything's coming there and it gives you the last mile service. So they're linking up with their handlers to get their jihad on in Kabul, Kandahar, Helmand province, all across Afghanistan to kill infidels, us. So we enter this town. We pass through it 6 o'clock in the morning before. We're coming back through there. Total atmospheric's changing. This is 9 o'clock in the morning, Josh. I see like, okay, there are, and when you see these types of conditions where there's no women and children, you be prepared because when there's an exodus of women and children, they're ready to fight.
Oh yeah.
Now, as we enter this town, this little village, we see not just 100% absence of women and children, but we see nothing but fighting age men lined up on both sides of the road, sort of like a parade or like a funeral. And as soon as we enter this village, this van filled with fuel and mortar rounds detonates on us, trying to attempt not just to blow us up and injure us with the shrapnel, but to light us on fire. It hits our second vehicle in the patrol, knocking the turret gunner who's manning his machine gun down. He stands up, he's on fire. He looks to his left and he immediately sees a sports utility vehicle driving, heading to T-bone him and finish that vehicle off. 3 jihadists are hanging out of the sports utility vehicle, firing their AK-47s, fully automatic. Our first 2 vehicles orient, aim in, and kill the jihadists firing at us from that vehicle. The driver bails out of that vehicle, continues to shoot at us from this ditch. No kidding. 10 months later, after the investigation, we go to this trial, the longest war crimes trial in American history. That jihadist that was driving the vehicle, Haji Lawani Kamadan, that's his actual name, he was brought onto American base and he was testifying against us. And the prosecution, which was the convening authority, was General Mattis. You know, the Army was happy to kick us out because we were working for Army Special Operations and the very first Marine Special Operations Task Force. Josh, that's like you asking your wife to meet your girlfriend. We were not wanted. We were competition. This was a threat to the future of the Green Berets. So they didn't want us there. They're happy to kick us out of the country. So when we fought back, killed the jihadists in that vehicle, and that was driving at us from some dirt road. You know, they said we were spraying, they said we were drunk and dismounted. The total false narrative started in just about 20 minutes. This is on international press. But then we got shot at from our right flank on the right side of the road. So their goal was to completely envelop us. They dragged a vehicle across the road, blocking us in that kill zone. They had a mob swarm to trap us, fired at on both sides, sniper fire coming at us from above. And this is 9 o'clock in the morning, so there's no fog of war. I can't really recall. I'm having a Joe Biden moment and sloppy Joe. No, this was crystal clear. When we returned fire, we did what Marines do. We counterattacked and violently killed our enemy that was on both flanks. I reported it. We did a text report. Immediately, it was received by our higher headquarters. We were supposed to go in there because Petraeus and Mattis in 2006 made this counterinsurgency doctrine that all U.S. forces would use. It was joint Army and Marine Corps. And when you look back at like how they're creating this forever war, they saw what failed in Vietnam, and they used that, winning hearts and minds of radical jihadists that believe in Sharia law and trying to convince them to have some central form of government and a democracy. Well, it didn't work. And I believe, honestly, I believe all these members of Congress, these 4-star generals that were pushing that out of Central Command in Tampa that came up with this and pushed it, they should send their brides to bed and breakfast in Bagram, if they believe that stuff works, let's put some skin in the game. Let's have your family live there, because we did that for 20 years. And
Exactly.
you thought that was so. Up until 2005, Afghanistan, I mean, we violently attacked them. We literally bombed them, and Taliban retreated into Pakistan. But then they had a resurgence when we were trying to win their hearts and minds, and we had this doctrine of, they hijacked, Josh, this Hippocratic oath of first do no harm. They literally gave medals to all the armed services for courageous restraint. So sending mixed signals when you get blown up like we did, they don't want you to fight back. They just want you to take it in retreat. And that's going to ride the clock out, because these generals realize, and every single one of them, as I mentioned, they all work for these military industrial complex. This is
Yep.
big money. So
It almost reminds me, I don't mean to cut you off, it almost reminds me of Extortion 17,
yes,
which is probably, if not the biggest, one of the biggest loss of life of in the military in Afghanistan, certainly in that war. And that was when they lied and covered up, right? The Pentagon lied and covered up. And they said that, that all these different things happened that didn't happen. And basically, you had two insurgents that were left after they were being shot at, from the air with these missiles. And they were told, do not engage. You are not allowed to engage. It's almost like Benghazi, right? They asked for extra cables, hey, security's getting bad here. Things are really deteriorating really fast. Nothing, right? So that's the thing. It's like there's been a pattern of this type of like left-leaning rules of engagement where you don't kill anyone until you're being shot at first. It's really sick and it's dangerous. And so that's what it reminded me of almost immediately is Extortion 17, which again, not too many people even know about.
Example on both sides of offense and defense. So they sent us there. We immediately hit the ground running, just like the SEALs from Extortion 17. When you're doing something right, I believe there are people in America who compromise themselves, and they're wanting that to end because they want to slow roll and have this turn into a forever war. Just like when we withdrew from Afghanistan, again, they'll find a way, just like on Wall Street. If one administration isn't for gas and oil, they'll find another one that's for defense.
Right.
Gotcha. We'll flood. It's okay. We can leave Afghanistan. The Pentagon is the tail wagging the dog. And if the dog says we're going to leave Afghanistan, we'll still find a way to pivot agilely, quickly, and pour all this money. We'll
Yeah.
create this war in Afghanistan, and it's the justified thing to do. And we'll preach to the whole American public about how good and this is the righteous thing, and Russia's so evil. And
Yeah,
it's
and that's what they did. They pivoted to Ukraine, and they made people think that Russia is the bad guy in this conflict, which clearly they're not. Did they invade in 2014 Crimea? Yeah, they did. But did they do anything after that? No, because of course President Trump came in to play, and they weren't going to do anything. They waited until President Trump and the strength of the military was no longer there, and then they did what they did. But let's not forget why. Because of Ukraine's constant drive to join NATO. They don't want NATO that close to their borders. And you know what? I'm kind of glad it's a meat grinder, if you want to know the truth, in Ukraine. It's an unwinnable war. And again, we're throwing billions of dollars into another conflict that they can't win. And like you said, it's the military industrial complex just making more and more and more money through these, unwinnable and ridiculous wars.
Josh,
It's crazy.
there's so many countries in sub-Saharan Africa that there's genocide going on, civil wars, mass atrocity on a larger scale as far as total loss of life. We don't care, because if you arm one side, it would be a total slaughter, and you can't generate it the same way as like, wait a second, we can have Ukraine prop them up, do some training, equip them, and let them have at it, and this can last forever. Is genius if you're a puppet and on the payroll and you've already mortgaged your soul. And that's what's going on. But unfortunately, when our adversaries of the United States realize that we're compromised in the way that we are, this has other effects. So you see what China's done since, as I was mentioning, this divisiveness. While we have been pushing good service members out of the military because they won't take the jab, I mean, Biden did fire a lot of people. He fired tens of thousands. There's actually 6,000 people that were told to leave because they wouldn't get the jab. There's a lot more that have left voluntarily because they're just being hunted because they're not diverse. They're labeled just like Pete Hegseth's book, War on Warriors. They're labeled as extremists. This is going on right now as we speak, and it's leaving a hollow force. And our adversaries know, like, hey, we push this divisiveness. This is weakening the United States, and it's good for them. Let's go over some recent events that have happened internationally. So, our allies, Philippines, Taiwan, there's going to be a big war that goes on in Taiwan. We're estimating, I mean, the senior admiral, Pen Pano, in Honolulu at Camp Smith believes, for all the Pacific, believes that by 2025 we'll be in this war. And while we've been spreading this divisiveness inside our own ranks, China has built the largest navy. And while we spent 20 years in these Middle East wars, what did China do? They had 140 signatures, people that have got signed on to their One Belt, One Road initiative, which
Yes, BRI. Yep.
yeah, Josh,
Debt
Al
trap
Capone,
diplomacy. It's in my
yes,
book.
yes. Al Capone couldn't broker such good deals. And you see, like Sri Lanka, they collapsed because, and all these have terms and conditions, which all roads lead to Beijing, benefits the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party. This, they call it the Silk and Maritime Overland Routes. I mean, they have tied up the logistics for the next 100 years. And if Taiwan falls, I mean, just like if we wanted to push across from Florida to Havana in Cuba, let's just say conceptually, who would stop us? Well, the same kind of distance, less than 100 miles, just like the from Florida to Cuba. If China wanted to push the 96 miles across the Straits of Taiwan, which they've done 2 large-scale exercises this year surrounding complete envelopment to include the airspace above of Taiwan, they're going to do this someday. And the only way we can dislodge the Chinese Communist Party, the People's Liberation Army, from Taiwan is through airborne and aviation, or airborne and amphibious assault. It's going to take tens of thousands of lives lost, mainly by the United States, and create another forever war. But you say, will that really happen? Well, this past weekend, read about it. Fishing boat was seized by a Taiwan fishing boat was seized by China in April. A Philippine, we call it the second island chain, our allies in the Philippines, who are currently, this Filipino presidential administration is standing up, unlike Duarte previous. They're standing up to Xi. They had one of their boats harassed. They have these kind of naval militia the Chinese do, and they go in, they attack, and they can have some kind of plausible deniability, sort of like if like there was an Arizona militia that went across and did this border excursion in the United States, can say, well, it's not the United States, it's the militia. But that's what's going on. They're using a strong arm tactics. This is the results of not having a president who's strong and using strength as a deterrent, because that's what it was, and not a single. The Taliban are radical, and when the Taliban don't harm a hair on an American's head, it's because they fear, like, I'm going to get killed. I don't want that. And it didn't happen. But you look at what has happened in this administration, Josh, 7 American embassies closed. And you mentioned Benghazi. The last post that I served in as I retired was the commander of First Fast. It's a Marine Corps equivalent of a SWAT team. And we're regionally aligned to Europe and Africa. So as Ambassador Stevens was sending these communications, there was over 200 cables
I
sent.
interviewed his fiance at the time.
Yes,
after
he was
passed.
very active in requesting support. And FAST is, we don't just go to recapture an embassy, but we provide a deterrent if it's used proactively. But we had 2 platoons forward staged in Spain, and one moved up to Germany to sit with the Air Force's aircraft. In Ambassador Stevens was asking specifically what FAST is designed to do is to provide that cordon, that deterrent, so that nothing happens. And for 90 days, we've sat Marines sitting on packs doing nothing because Hillary Clinton's State Department and Barack Obama's administration are trying to paint this picture like peace is breaking out in the Middle East. But what was going on in Libya is they were upset with all these weapons coming in to fuel terrorism in Syria. I mean, it's a bad drug deal. Like you say, those that know where all the bodies are buried. Some of them have came out, but when 12 September 2012, the day after, we were allowed to go into Libya, and a young Marine knew that the lie that the Clintons were pushing was this was all from the results
Yeah,
of
the
a
video.
video, and that was a total lie. But this administration, right now, Joe Biden says after that his failed debate that at least I know how to tell the truth. He he doesn't know what the truth literally is. If he can't call the president of Ukraine, he's calling him Putin. I mean, he literally does not know. He's not in control. So you got to wonder, like, go back to saying, who's really running the show? Who is our
Yeah,
shadow government?
that's the scary part. That is the scary part. We'll talk about that here real briefly before we end. What are your thoughts here? Do you think that they're going to try to pull the 25th here? And if they do, we have to understand that it's, thank God, our founding fathers were pretty, right on the money, saying no shenanigans, nobody outside. The 25th literally says that the VP would then be ascended to the presidential position. Then they would have to pick a VP, but that VP would have to be confirmed through the House and the Senate 2/3 majority vote. So, and then remember, if they do an open convention, they're losing 3 states right off the bat, right? Nevada, Wisconsin, and Georgia. So again, time is not of the essence here. But in your opinion, what do you think is going to happen, especially after this last press conference?
This is just my opinion, and I've stated it for the last couple of years since the book had been published, that Joe Biden is not able to win this election. They know that. The reason they're putting up such a fight is Hunter Biden realizes how corrupt what has been going on. He is the reason he's not showed up to Congress, or when he finally did show up to Congress, he walks out of the House committee.
Left his
Is be
cocaine baggie.
Yes, and oh yeah, by the way, what? How did this cocaine get in the White House? Oh, we have this cocaine addict, uh, but who's unable to be rehabilitated. But he realizes there is so much dirt. He knows where all the bodies are buried. That's why they're putting up such a fight to do this. But eventually, I believe that Joe Biden, whether it's the 25th or voluntarily, and he realizes, okay, like I will anoint this heir apparent and they will protect me. That's what I believe that Obama was doing with Hillary. Is Obama knew he had so much dirt on him, but Hillary couldn't really trust her. I mean, who can trust the Clintons? But that was probably his most loyal. He chose her over Joe then. But they will, whether it's Kamala, but I do believe, and I've said this on other shows, that I believe they're going to have somebody who will be approved by the both houses. And if you look in the Trump administration, he had one candidate who stabbed him in the back, but who both houses knew that this guy, he's part of the deep state, and they loved him, and that was none other than retired Marine General James Mattis. I think he's a vice president
Wow.
candidate who will give the foreign policy and national security background, but he's sold out. As I mentioned, look what he did with the Theranos. Listeners,
Exactly.
look up Theranos General Mattis. Look how he testified to Congress, act like he jumped out with his golden parachute. Like, I put my own money in.
That's an
Well,
interesting thought because I haven't even thought about. I won't call him Mad Dog. I'll call him Chihuahua because
no,
again, he
lapdog.
hasn't shown the Mad Dog mentality in many, many, many years. But that's something I will admit I haven't even really thought of. But you know what? With all the rhinos in the House of Republicans, and then of course in the Senate, if they did put someone like Mattis on, I think he would get past the House and the Senate as a VP if they invoke the 25th. That's a Wow, you shocked me on that one. I'll be honest, I wasn't even thinking that. But then again, with how dangerous things are, they could play it up as, oh, with Taiwan being threatened and Ukraine war going on and North Korea shooting again. So yeah, I can see how they could do that. Phew. Wow, that would
Uh,
be crazy.
as a career reconnaissance officer, we're paid to see the unseen, to go
Yes,
300 kilometers behind enemy lines and see what's there, report it back accurately. Well, and that's what I do. And I don't have like this vindictive thing. Although Mattis was the convening authority, he sent an unprecedented, he dogpiled on us. He was, I don't like to call him Mad Dog, but he's a lapdog, but he sent 45 criminal investigators, 4 prosecuting attorneys, and they interrogated our Marines so viciously, so unethically and illegally, threatened to deport one Marine who legally immigrated, but they knew that like this is a point of vulnerability. I mentioned it in the book. Many immigrants think that they're never actually truly, like their citizenship, which the 14th Amendment protects, whether you're native born or naturalized, they think maybe I have it revoked. Well, he said on the witness stand that, the statement that he wrote in Afghanistan was correct, but then he was interrogated by prosecuting attorneys. So NCIS can use deception. Marine staff judge advocates, officers cannot. And he said these two officers, conducted this interrogation and coerced me into signing this. So he had to make a decision between his blood brothers, his family, and his brothers in arms, something no American soldier. I mean, this is something that we learn in survival, evasion, and resistance, like our POW training. But we're not supposed to do it. It's illegal to do on our own. But those lawyers, what happened to them, the prosecutors, they were actually promoted. This is the government that we are left with. This is our military. When you wonder why there's such low morale and we can't retain people, we can't recruit people, the Navy and the Army are looking at our third year in a row. I mean, the fiscal year is
We
coming
need
to
more
an end.
general patent and less patent leather, if you want to know the truth. I just had on Hung Cal a couple of weeks ago, and of course, he's as patriotic as anybody else. Whether he was born here or not, and of course he wasn't. He's an American citizen, and he's a patriot. He's hopefully going to win the Senate in Virginia. But yeah, it's crazy, crazy times. But look, I just want to say I appreciate you being on the show. I'm sure we could talk another 3-4 hours. There's probably so much more that we could actually go through. But the guest is Fred Galvin, and the book is A Few Bad Men. Where can folks go to find this new incredible book?
On Amazon or through my website at commandoshow.com. It had just sold out at the beginning of this week, and I've been told by the publisher that they were able to order it and get it, and it's also available on Kindle or Audible. No matter, I've had it sold out twice before, and I believe right when the book was published, somebody didn't want this to get in everybody's hands. Just this week, Josh, I've had fake accounts on Instagram. I've had every time I'm on, I'm interviewed, people go out there and try to destroy and defame me. It's really ridiculous that this is lawfare. This is what thugs do. You have goons that do stuff like this. This is not
65 Project. People need to Google that. They need to know what the 65 Project is, because that is a bunch of criminal lawyers basically for the bar, and they just go after conservative lawyers that defend President Trump, that defend other people that are conservative figures and things like that. They're disgusting, and people need to know about them as well. But again, thank you so much for being on the program. I wish you nothing but the best of luck. And of course, thank you so much.
Thank you for your patriotism and your courage, Josh. God bless you.
Hey, Josh Bernstein here, America's favorite bald badass. Did you know that Bill O'Reilly charges $6.95 a month to see his content? Or how about the Blaze TV, who charges $10 a month? Or you could always subscribe to the Ben Shapiro podcast at $12 a month. But if you are looking for the best value and the most hardest hitting news, you've come to the right spot. Because here at JoshBernsteinUncensored.com, we drop the most jaw-dropping stories 7 days a week, starting at only $3 a month. So please head on over to the new releases tab, become an exclusive member of the Badass Nation, and join the fight to save this country with one of America's most hated, feared, and censored conservative voices. Remember, if it's banned on social media, you'll find it here. God bless.